I heard this one from a senior at university. I haven't heard anything like it. I find it an interesting and creepy experience, and I hope you do too. It happened when she was in her 4th year of primary school. She said that every time she walked home from school, she would see the same middle-aged man coming out of an alleyway. He just seemed to stand there, staring into space absent-mindedly. Since she was young at the time, she found the man creepy and felt uneasy when she saw him. She told her mother about him. Her mother decided to pick her up from school once she heard about the man. Her mum picked her up from school each school day for about a month, and then she decided that her daughter was to walk to school again. For a while, things were fine and life went back to normal, but then one day she realized that the creepy guy was back again. He was there again in the alleyway, where she had seen him last time. He usually stood there in silence, but this time, he spoke. He said 3 words, which would leave her entirely puzzled for years to come. "I want legs." She said she doesn't remember what happened after that, but suddenly she was outside of her home. It's like the memory of how she got home had been erased from her mind, and since that day she never saw the man again. She said that she cannot remember what he looks like from the waist down, or what he was wearing. She had another similar mysterious experience she wanted to share with me. It happened on a day that she was absent from school with a cold. She was upstairs in her bedroom, in bed with the covers wrapped around her. She could see outside quite well from her bed, if she sat up. She said that she was gazing outside and she saw a woman. The woman seemed a little strange. She was dressed as if she was going to a wake, or a funeral. She was wearing a long black mourning dress and a hat. She was stood there in front of my senior's house looking down at the ground. Somehow she felt worried for the woman, so she went out to the veranda. She says to this day she doesn't know what force compelled her to do this. And as soon as she stepped out onto that balcony, the woman in black raised her head and looked at her. Her face was as pale as snow, not in a metaphorical way, but in an actual way. The woman had pale, snow-white skin. The woman outside muttered something, and although my senior was far away from the woman, she heard her as if she was right next to her. The woman said, "I want legs." And once again her memories from that point onward are missing. When she came to, she was lying on the balcony floor. She checked her watch, and to her surprise, she realized that 2 hours had passed. By the way, my senior is still living, still healthy, and she has never had any form of illness or accident which has damaged her legs. She still has no clue what happened to her when she was young. I don't know either, but it feels paranormal. I'd love to hear any suggestions. I used to work on board a ship, and I remember when I joined the company, the ship I was going to be boarding entered the shipyard for a routine inspection. I was able to see some of the places and aspects of the ship I usually wouldn't see if I was at sea. It was interesting. The ship in question was massive. It was a super large oil tanker, which was 300 meters in length. It's hard to fathom that something that big can exist, but it does. Don't worry, the ocean makes it look tiny. I don't know if that thought is comforting or not. We were checking the internal pipeline of the ship. When it comes to a ship of this size, from the deck to the bilge, or bottom of the ship, it spans for about 30 meters. It's massive. The pipeline in question ran along the bottom of the ship. The pipe wasn't all that thick. It was about 80 centimeters in diameter. I can't remember how long it was, but I think it was about 150 meters, and it was in a straight line. It might have been longer, actually. It was pretty incredible, but next came the daunting part. Inspecting the pipe. I tried to console myself with the idea that it was just a straight line pipe and there were no corners or bends. I was nervous enough, though. I don't think I was ready for navigating bends. It was pitch black in there, and I was feeling claustrophobic. I don't know if it was some sort of test of my mental strength, but as I was a couple of meters into the tunnel, my boss called, "If you get stuck in there, there's no way I can get you out, so be careful, alright?" Thankfully, he was ahead of me in the pipeline. I guessed that if there was any trouble, he would tell me to turn back. We had elbow and knee pads on, and I don't think I could have done it without them. We had flashlights too. None of these things made crawling through a deep dark pipe on all fours any easier though. It was my first time doing this, and it was really hard to keep pace with my boss. Also, it was an incredibly hot day in some port of Singapore. Humid, yeah, you bet. My mentality in that situation, my mentality in that scenario was pretty much get in, get out. I wanted it to all be over as soon as possible. I was new and in a sense an underling. I felt like it wasn't my responsibility. I was looking for the quickest route out of the pipes. Like I said, the pipeline we entered was about 80 centimeters in diameter. It was tight. The boss said that he had been in a pipe before with a diameter of 60 centimeters, and on top of that, that pipe had twists and turns. It went on for 200 meters. That sounds crazy to me. The oil tanks I mentioned earlier are separated all over the ship. I think there was about 10 in total, except for a couple of small ones. The area of the tanks are massive. There is only one entrance or exit to these tanks. You have to open a meter-wide hatch and climb down a ladder. It's kind of like a manhole, I guess. The light comes in from above when you're in the tanks, and it creates a very dim and dark atmosphere. It's truly unique. So if you close all the manholes that I mentioned, without checking properly, then naturally you'll trap someone down there if they're on inspection duty. In fact, there are countless blind spots and places to hide on the ship if you look from the deck. Even static energy can ignite the oil in these tankers, and that can cause a massive explosion. So therefore, once these tankers are sealed, no oxygen can get in, as not to create conditions where explosions are possible. In other words, if you get trapped in one of these things with the manhole-like cover sealed, you'll die of suffocation, slowly, in the dark. Actually, I've heard stories of these types of deaths occurring. People in my line of work have discovered bodies in the tanks. The bodies have been said to be found near the ladder at the bottom of the hatch, and some say that they have seen scratch marks on the inside of the hatch. They say that the bodies have been missing fingernails, and sometimes you can see the bones of their fingers. They scratch them to the bone, desperately trying to escape the coffin-like tanker. I thought these stories were nothing but rumors, but here in Singapore, I've known many ships that leave with a certain number of crew members on board, and when they come back, that number is reduced. I thought it was someone trying to scare me. But believe me, I've seen the vacancies get posted, and I've seen the searches all over the ship for the missing staff members. It's proof enough for me. I've heard this dangerous inspection work has been outsourced to Southeast Asia to save on costs. These cheaper companies have been said to be less safety conscious during inspections and less interested in devoting man-hours in search of missing crewmates. Anyways, when I have been down in the tankers and crawling along those pipes on board, I have felt something. I've felt something close to loneliness, but much more profound. I felt desperation and horror, and in those moments, all the rumors felt like they could be true. This happened when I was a college student. One of my female friends told me that she had had some trouble with someone peeping on her. She said that the voyeur was staring at her from an apartment in the building across the street. She said that it had been happening for the last couple of days. I told her that it was awful, and I wanted to talk to this creep. I went over to her place so she could show me what she was talking about. Her dorm is behind an apartment building, and her window is clearly visible to the apartments. There is a parking lot which separates the two buildings, so there was a little bit of distance there. She took one step towards the window and said, that creep is watching me again." I looked out the window and I couldn't see what she was talking about at first, since my eyesight isn't the best. But when I looked closely, I saw that there appeared to be a guy looking towards her window. His apartment was a couple of floors higher than her dorm. He looked like he was sat down. "Whoa, this guy's staring right at us," I said. "I know, right? Like I said, he's been doing it for the last 2 or 3 days. He really creeps me out." I imagined that the windows were closer and I would be able to shout at the guy, but since there was a bit of distance there, I couldn't yell at him. I waved my hands around and gave him the finger, but he didn't seem fazed by that. He just went on staring. "Shall I go over there and tell him to quit looking at you?" I said. "Please. Thank you. He freaks me out. I'll keep the window closed and the curtains shut for a while," she said. I stayed over her apartment that night. It was pretty nice. I woke up in a good mood, and I thought that I'd give the guy the benefit of the doubt because I didn't know if there was some reason why he was always looking out of his window, but when I saw him staring at her window every single time I went over to visit her, I started to get really angry. He would even do it at nighttime. He left his lights off so we didn't see him, but I knew he was still sat there watching. The following morning, instead of going over there, I decided to call the police. I said that I wanted to complain officially since he was freaking her out so much. Then the next day the curtains were closed, and I was happy. I was a little disappointed that I didn't make the call sooner though. She was relieved. It turned out to be a pretty sweet situation because we started dating. It had been about 2 to 3 months since the peeping incident, and things were going great. Then one night we got a knock on our door. It was the police. They told us that the man across the street who was staring at her had taken his own life. I was shocked, yet I couldn't figure out why they were telling us this. We let them continue. It turns out that the man had been dead for a while. The whole time we had been complaining of him staring at her, day and night. He was dead. From the view of her window, it looked as if he was sat by the window, where in reality, he was hanging suspended from the floor. When I heard this, I was truly disturbed, and I'm sorry to share this with you if it upsets you. It really affected my girlfriend. She said that she couldn't stay in her dorm that night. I got us a cheap hotel for the night. She was scared to sleep with the lights off that night, and the nights that followed. The next day we were back at college, and she told the story to one of her close friends. Her friend agreed that it was a frightening experience and understood why she was so visibly shaken. She asked why she came to class that day, and my girlfriend said that she didn't want to be in her dorm. She said even when she was getting her bag ready for the day of classes, she still felt as if someone was watching her. Her friend paused, and then asked a question, which terrified us both. "If you two complained about this guy peeping, then who closed the curtains if he had been dead the whole time?" We were shaken up by this. We had to call the police again and make another report. I was told that someone would be in touch. Later that night, the officer who took my complaint called me back. He said that when he called at the man's apartment, no one came to the door. He said, "Are you 100% sure that the curtain wasn't closed from the start? Maybe it was just open a crack." I said of course I was sure the curtain wasn't closed. That's how we knew he was looking at us. He asked me to check this with my girlfriend. And I thought, we called you to make a complaint about peeping, not about a curtain being closed. My girlfriend agreed, it was definitely open. The officer said that he would look into it, but we haven't heard anything back. It makes me kind of nervous because if our memory is correct and the curtain was open, then someone in that apartment closed it. And that someone might have seen me on the phone to the cops after I was waving at them and flipping them off. I really just hope that somehow our memories are wrong about the incident. I really doubt it though. I'm really worried that someone will come to my girlfriend's dorm when I'm not there. This happened last night and I'm still shook up about it. I was at home and I was watching this show about people trying new kinds of food and their reactions to the food. It wasn't that great and I was barely paying attention to it, and that was when I heard the doorbell. Oh, by the way, I live alone, so I wasn't expecting anyone. I headed over to the front door and opened the door without much thought, and definitely without hesitation. There was a woman there. She was dressed in a one-piece dress, which seemed uncomfortable for her, especially during this season. It was winter. She stood there, looking freezing, saying nothing, just glaring at me with a blank expression on her face. It was almost as if she was looking through me. There we both stood in silence, staring at one another. I was searching my brain for any possible links or ties that I might have to this silent woman stood at my doorway. She wasn't an ex-girlfriend, co-worker, nor acquaintance. I was racking my brain when the thought occurred to me. This isn't worth my time. So I asked outright, "What's up?" She spoke, but her voice was so quiet that I could barely make out a syllable. I said, "What?" in a loud voice, and all I got back were more mumbles. I was about to shut the door on her when I felt a jolt of power against the door. I was really shocked by this, and naturally, I tried to shut the door on her harder. She jammed her leg in between the door and the frame of the door. She seemed hell-bent on getting in. Like a complete contradiction of her meek and quiet voice, she was now proving to be strong and forceful. However, I managed to shake her off and shut the door. My hands moved quickly towards the lock, and I sighed when I heard that satisfying sound of the door locking. What followed was her ringing the doorbell again and again. It was endless. Worse than the doorbell was the sound of her hands pummeling the frosted glass off my door. It sounded like she was determined to smash it. I felt so panicked. I couldn't do much about the situation. It happened so quickly. My heart was jumping in my chest while my mind was trying to rationalize it. Then I heard the sound of the neighbor's doorbell ringing and banging at their door. It sounded like there was more than one person out there. I was really worried. I heard them screaming next door. They had a family. I just stood there frozen. It took a while for my brain to get into gear. Fear's icy fingers gripped my heart, and I felt like they would never let go. I heard the woman move up to the next apartment, the one after my neighbor's apartment. Enough was enough. I grabbed one of my golf clubs and raced out into the hall, shouting as many menacing threats as I could. I saw that woman retreating down the steel communal stairs, and she looked over her shoulder at me and smiled, as if to suggest she wasn't frightened by my threats. I headed back in and locked the door after me. That night I tried to get to sleep, yet sleep wouldn't come because I heard nails scratching my door, gentle knocks, and a pleading, quiet voice begging me to open the door. I was too scared to sleep and far too scared to move. I can still hear that sound, the sound of her nails against the splintered wood of my door. I don't know what happened that night, or if she'll be back, but that was the scariest experience that happened to me. I often shudder at the thought of what might have happened if she got in. A few years ago, I was searching for some part-time work with my friends. I found an interesting-looking job in a magazine. The advert read, "A day's work required. Manage my mountain lodge. No experience necessary." It seemed perfect, but the pay was even better. 20,000 yen. That's over $180, which is a lot to a kid in university. I called the number in the magazine straight away. Unfortunately, they told me that the position had been filled. I was really disappointed. The next week, I got the new edition of the same magazine, and I saw the job advertised again. I called straight away. I really wanted that job. I was offered an interview. I was so happy. The interview would take place in a restaurant across town. Okay, a little unorthodox, but I didn't mind. I was also asked if I had any friends who were looking for work. I said that I did, and I was asked to bring him along to the interview. When we met up, we were told by the interviewer that we would be paid the morning after our stay in the lodge. That pretty much seemed to be the interview. We were hired on the spot. I guess he liked the look of us. The location of the lodge was surprisingly close to the city. It was in a privately owned forest. We were handed maps. When we arrived, we walked as deep into the forest as we could, but our progress was halted by a chain-link fence. A rusty sign hung. It read, "No trespassing." We found our way to an entrance gate, and there we were greeted by an older man who asked, "Ah, you're X and Y, aren't you? Listen to my instructions and then follow me." We walked in a three all together for about 10 minutes. I imagined that we'd be working in some lovely rustic log cabin, but what I saw up ahead was a mass-manufactured metal shed. The only issue with the place was the fact that there was no shower or bath. That, and we had to bring our own food. We were warned of this beforehand, but still it was a little bit annoying. But I didn't let it ruin the good vibe though. We were in great spirits that day. We received our instructions. We were to water the plants outside at night and in the morning, and then perform light cleaning in the lodge. That was it. Since there was no TV in the building, we kept ourselves from boredom by playing card games and with our smartphones. There was no aircon either. At first we thought this would be hell, but since the shed was deep in the woods, it turned out to be surprisingly cool in there, despite it being made of metal. When night fell, we ate dinner, a banquet from the convenience store. The dinner of kings. We decided to get to sleep early, as there was little else we could do. We both jumped into separate beds. The metal frames creaked with every movement. The beds looked like those typical ones you would see in military films, army beds. That night, I had the most disturbing nightmare of my life. I could only recall it in dazed fragments. It went like this. As I slept in the bed, hands from beneath the floorboards reached up. Unrelenting, grasping arms. They grasped and tore at my body. They tore it to shreds, like in the zombie movies. I must have woken up screaming because my friend shouted out, "What's wrong?" I told him that I had a terrible nightmare. His face looked pale when I explained the nightmare, and he told me he had experienced the same thing. That was weird. We both were silent for a while, the early morning light creeping through the cracks of the metal shed. My friend broke the awkward silence after a while by saying, "I feel sick." It felt as if the floor was vibrating. I could understand why he felt sick. I felt a sickness only akin to seasickness. I thought it was just the aftermath of my dream. My friend got up and started peering down through the floorboards. He dropped to his knees and started to pull at one of the boards. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me that he wanted to see what was under the floor. "Come on, give me a hand," he called. I was curious. It was light out. It was around 5 a.m. Not really bright, but a little dim, enough to see though. He lifted a board back, and I shone the torch I had brought with me beneath the boards. My friend then shouted, Arms! I craned my neck round to see what he was screaming about. Beneath the floorboards were countless, pale, amputated arms. They looked as if they were cut with a machine-like precision. It was at this point I realized they were non-human arms. Mannequin arms. As if this wasn't disturbing enough, attached to each of the mannequin arms was a Polaroid of a woman. What I can only assume was the woman in the photo's name was written on each arm in magic marker. I swear that there were nearly 50 in total. I touched one of the arms. I had to check if it was human or not. I wouldn't be able to sleep if I didn't check. Hard plastic. My friend said, "Let's just wait outside until we get the money and then let's run and never look back." I like the sound of that plan, I said. We were waiting outside for another 2 hours when the same old man who had let us through the chain link fences returned. "Hello boys, thank you so much for your hard work. Incidentally, are you both interested in making some more money? 3 more nights for $550? "No thanks," my friend and I called as we took our pay from his hand. We moved quickly. We wanted nothing more to do with that shady organization, whatever the point of it was. I remember I looked back once. I caught the old man looking angrily towards us and pulling out his cell phone and putting it to his ear. I wanted to report this activity, but they hadn't really committed an offense. And when I tried to call the number again one night at a party after I told the story, there was a message stating that the number was no longer in service. The advert didn't appear in the magazine after that. I guess they got what they needed. Whatever that was. Oh, it sounds like it's starting to rain, everybody. We better go inside. Since I was a child, I've seen the same person appear before a terrible incident befalls our family. Perhaps saying person is misleading. Trust me, this thing isn't a person. It's been appearing for decades. I saw it before my grandmother died, before my grandfather died, before my uncle died. I wasn't even that close to my uncle. I hadn't seen him in years, but I still saw it. It didn't just appear before deaths. No. It would show itself before hardships, sadnesses, and times of stress. When my cousin's wife was going through a rough patch, it revealed itself. So that leads me to believe that it's not necessarily bound to us by blood. It's not a scary, shadowy figure. It's just a normal-looking human. Someone who wouldn't look out of place in a crowd, perhaps. It doesn't do anything. It's just there. It always looks the same. Therefore, I always recognize it. It was a shape, yet a person. It just was always the same version of itself. Apparently, I seem to be the only one who can see it. It appeared to be genderless. It looked like a man, but I guess it could be taken for a woman. It has a horrible, blank expression, and it appears just out of my eye line. Then, as soon as I zero in on it, it's gone. I have never seen it inside a building. It's always outside. Most of the time, it's in my field of vision before I know about it. Whenever I saw it, I would always get stressed out, and I would start to worry about my family. Years rolled by, and thankfully, my family hadn't suffered any misfortunes. So I forgot about it, since I hadn't seen it for so long. But it appeared again this spring. I was playing a little hooky from work that day, and I walked to a nearby convenience store. I stood outside, smoking a cigarette. I glanced across the street, and there it was, once again, stood stock still with its expressionless face. The memories came back. I thought that soon someone I cared about would suffer some hardship, or worse still, die. It's a terrifying thing. Every time I see it, I get incredibly anxious that the phone will ring, or the police will knock at my door with their hats in their hands to tell me that something terrible has happened. 3 nervous days passed, and then I saw it again. I was going to a different convenience store. It must have been after midnight. I was about to cross the road when it appeared in my field of vision. It was terrifying to see it so late at night, and in such quick succession. Usually, I wouldn't see it for years, but it was back, only 3 days later. I couldn't process this information. I just stood still, in the middle of the road. I stopped paying attention to the road. I didn't see the car approaching. The frightening thing was the distance between me and the car. I managed to jump out of its way, and there must have only been a couple of centimeters in it. I could picture myself disappearing under its hood and the wheels going over me. It was my fault. I wasn't paying attention, and I nearly caused an accident. I was really shaken up. I wanted to go and apologize to the driver, so I ran over to the driver's side window. As soon as I caught a glimpse of the driver, I was immediately frightened. The driver was staring at me with a completely blank expression. He looked like that thing. I met eyes with him, or it, and it just tutted at me. And its expression went from a blank one to one of pure hatred. I backed away from the car, and the driver seemed as if he had just awoken from some kind of trance. He looked around, panicked, and embarrassingly sped away. Until that day, I always thought that thing, it, was a kind of spectre of death, some kind of harbinger of doom. I never thought that it was malevolent and was out to hurt my family and I. But it seems like it was the driving force for our misery. It was always there, and it nearly claimed my life too. I haven't seen it since last spring. No one in my family has died, and of course, I'm not dead either. I'm living each day under its shadow, worried that one day it will be back, and I won't catch a lucky break. I'm sorry if this story's a bit long, but it's true. I live in a small town which was partially destroyed in the Miyagi earthquake. Many homes were lost. Our house wasn't affected too badly. One of the outer walls were damaged and a huge chest of drawers fell down. Since we worked from home, it was a bit disruptive and difficult to find the time to clean up. I was taking calls from customers every day. My dad was busy working and visiting customers. Since the damage was so great, we had nothing but sympathy for them, and we wanted to do everything we could for them. A week passed in the blink of an eye. One weekend, I knew I had to clean the house up, but I was just so tired. I couldn't find the energy. So I decided to go on a solo trip to the hot springs to rejuvenate myself. There was one about 40 minutes away by car. I got back later, and from the car I could see that a light was on the second floor. My parents and my grandparents are usually out at around this time I got back. Furthermore, the light that was on was the light in my bedroom. I left for the hot springs at around midday, so I would have no reason to turn that light on. I wondered if it was my little brother. He lives in Tokyo, but he might have come back to visit us. Maybe he was in my room playing on my console or something. It was a bit of a stretch, but it did seem feasible at the time. I parked up and walked into our family home, not noticing that the door was unlocked and my brother's shoes weren't by the entrance. I called out that I was home. I ran upstairs and down the hall to my bedroom. The door was shut. I opened it and saw that my room was empty. Yet the light was still on. My bed looked different, especially the covers. Some of my drawers were open too. It dawned on me now that the door shouldn't have been unlocked if everyone was out. Why was my bedroom light on? Where was my brother? So many different thoughts swirled around my head. I froze in place. Suddenly, I couldn't move. I remembered that there had been burglaries in the area, and I stood there, shocked. I looked around my room and noticed that my PC and monitor were turned on. Now I knew that a person had been in here recently. If you leave your computer on, the monitor goes to sleep after a while, right? They could still be in the house, I grimly thought. I tried to regain my composure and think about what to do next. I then heard a noise from my closet. The intruder was in my closet. I looked over and saw an eye peering at me from the crack between the doors. I ran for it as fast as I could downstairs and out the door. I got into my car and drove to a friend's house. I called my parents when I got there. I didn't call the police. I should have, but I was in such a panic. I guess I just wanted to know if my parents were okay too. That was pretty dumb of me, I know. Luckily my dad was close by, and he raced home, and he checked the house over, but he couldn't find the intruder anywhere. There was no sign of anything in any other rooms being disrupted either. It seemed as if my room was the only room which had been targeted. The strangest thing was that nothing had been stolen. I told the police at this point, but they told me that what had happened was probably just a misunderstanding, and I had forgotten to turn the computer off and the light off and lock the door. They therefore wouldn't investigate. This really pissed me off. The whole incident freaked me out. I wondered if my family had a stalker. I thought about that for a while and spoke with my family, and then I remembered. A guy. From the year before last to last year, even though I would do nothing other than stay at home or hang out with my friends, a guy was harassing me. We only went out on a couple of dates, and I quit seeing him after he started to become possessive. He would hide outside my house and jump out at me, call me constantly, drop off gifts, and just genuinely terrify me. It stopped at around October time last year. I thought that was all behind me. He lived miles away in the next city, but he was super persistent. He was crazy. This really scared me. So my dad decided to take things into his own hands. He went to this guy's house to confront him. There was no evidence that this was the guy who had been in our home. There was no evidence that anyone had been in our home, but I had a gut feeling he was something to do with it. I wanted him to admit it, so the police could get involved and I could get a restraining order. We arrived at his house, and as we did, his mother ran out to greet our car. She didn't look well. You're the one who did this to my son, she called. She looked so angry. He died yesterday, she stated in a low voice. We didn't know what to say. My dad began to stutter an apology and began to explain the purpose of our visit, but she cut him off. What did you do to my son? I did my best to explain the chain of events which led us to her house. Last year, and the one before, the break-in, etc. Then she looked at me and said, You killed him. Then she just started screaming it. We argued, but there was nothing we could say to her. Obviously, she must have known something about what had happened, otherwise she wouldn't have reacted like that. We gave up and went back to the car. We didn't want to worsen her pain if her son was really dead. She didn't seem herself. She was always nice when I met her. My dad really wanted to get to the bottom of this. He was so angry that someone had been in our family home. We drove to a convenience store and waited there for about an hour, and then went back to his family home. My dad tried one of the neighbors. I think it was the second house down from his. He asked if they knew anything about what had happened. And it seems as if he did take his own life, but they could not be certain. They said that he had demons for sure, and that they would hear him screaming late into the night. This was disturbing and sad, to be honest. When we got home, we talked about other things to stop thinking about it. I was winding down to get ready for bed. I was checking my emails and listening to some music. I always saved my MP3s in my documents for some reason. I opened the folder and noticed a text document that hadn't been there before. It was addressed to me. I was worried about opening it. I didn't like it. After a few agonizing moments, my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, and it horrified me. Of course, it was from that man. All my suspicions were now justified in this document. I read it all, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. He was writing it as if it was the last words anyone would read by him. It was like a suicide note. He had detailed all the dates we had been on, as well as writing about made-up dates that we'd never been on. He sounded completely deluded. He was so normal when I met him. He went to a good university, and he was a perfectly fine person. Why did he do this? It was so sad. But I had no proof that he was dead. I found no obituary, and believe me, I looked for one. I started to get really creeped out again, and before long, I felt eyes on me wherever I went. I decided to park further away from our house, and I changed rooms. I noticed that from close by, on a hill, if you had binoculars, you could see right into my second-floor bedroom. I now live on the ground floor, in my brother's old room. I still feel as if he's out there somewhere, but I doubt it from time to time. This is just a reminder that if stalking stops after a while, it doesn't mean that it stopped for good. I mean, he got into our house, and he knew the password to unlock my computer. "3 years ago, I was admitted to hospital with kidney stones. It was horrible. On the first day, I was pretty much okay during the daytime, but at night I felt pain like you wouldn't believe. It really was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. It got so bad that night, I was thinking of calling the nurse, but I thought I would try to endure it for as long as I possibly could. I thought that, if the stone passed, then the pain might go away. I had been there sweating, trying to endure this pain for about an hour when the door opened. I thought to myself, during this hour no patients came and went, so I guessed it might be a nurse doing the rounds. Oh great, maybe I'll get some painkillers, I thought. Not you, I heard a male voice softly mutter. It seemed like the owner of that voice was shuffling around in slippers. He was going around the beds. I was in a 6-bed room, and at night all the partition curtains were drawn, It sounded like this person was looking for something, as I heard him once again mutter, "Not you," as he passed around the room. I started to feel sick, and chills were shooting up my back. I was really suffering with this pain. I could see his silhouette through the partition curtains. I didn't want this guy to know that I was awake, because then I would have to speak to him. And because I was hurting, there was no way that I wanted to have a chit-chat. I laid my head on the pillow and closed my eyes. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Because I was new in the hospital, I felt like I didn't know the people in my room well enough to ask them about last night. Like I said, I was in a 6-bed room, and everyone in there seemed to be in for various minor issues. I read the room and understood that it wasn't a particularly talkative bunch. No one wants to chat much if they're in pain, I guess. After a day or two, there was a change in the room. The guy who was next to me left, and a new guy came in. New guy was a middle-aged man. He was more talkative than the others. We had a short conversation, and he told me he was in hospital with gastric pain, and he suspected that it was a stomach ulcer. I was still in pain with the descent of the stones into my bladder. It was getting really bad now. The pain was back with a vengeance. It was nighttime when the pain got worse again. It was similar to that night I heard the man walk around the ward. Then, just like clockwork, I heard the same low male voice mutter, "Not you." What the hell was this guy doing in here again, I wondered. Then, I heard him say something different for the first time. "You," he said. I heard his voice very close to my ear. I couldn't turn my body to face that direction due to the pain. I could only turn my head. Maybe it was more than pain, come to think of it. Maybe it was some unknown fear that prevented me from moving. There was a man stood beside the bed next to me. I thought about that voice, and I thought about the Grim Reaper. I managed to convince myself that the guy in the next bed would die soon. I don't know why these thoughts or premonitions entered my brain, but the next thing I did was even weirder. I tried to summon enough energy to throw open the partition curtains. I felt waves of panic wash over my mind. I didn't know what I was about to see. With the curtain now slightly pushed aside, I could see a man stood by the bed. He was wearing a white patient's gown. He was just a feeble and frail old man. I stared at him confused and dazed, and then he just shuffled his way out of the room. I thought that I was making a fuss out of nothing, and I was ashamed that I allowed my imagination to run away with me. The next morning I passed the stone, and then in the afternoon the doctor told me that I was going to be discharged that day. That was a relief. The guy in the bed next to me was gone, and I didn't know where he went. I was still kind of weirded out by the events of last night. Surely, if there was a guy walking around at night, the patients or staff members must have known about it, but no one seemed to know what I was talking about when I asked. Before I left, and now that I was able to move, I decided to take a little walk to see if I could find the guy who was in the bed next to me. Something about him just lingered on my mind, and I didn't like it. I wanted to settle my curiosity, and I hoped that he was okay. I went and I asked the doctor about him. I found out that the man was now in the intensive care ward. He looked almost unconscious. He looked very thin, and his face was almost expressionless. There was only a little pink left in his cheeks. I think that I escaped something unworldly in that hospital. My family lives in the countryside, and the mountains are all around us. It's pretty nice. Sometimes we would go into the woods and pick wild vegetables. My grandpa taught me how to forage and where to find vegetables and mushrooms when I was in elementary school. By the time I was in junior high school, I went alone or with friends on trips into the forest. It was a Sunday, and me and 2 friends had arranged to go into the woods for foraging. I don't know why we all loved to do it. Maybe it was because it made us feel mature or something. I don't know. Things went well to begin with, but when we grew tired and decided to head home, things went downhill. We were walking down the narrow dirt path we had used to enter the forest, and my friend screamed. Well, it wasn't uncommon to cut your legs on a branch or have a bug fly at you or land on you. That's what I thought happened at first. I looked over to him, and he wasn't rubbing a wound or swatting away a bug. He was stood completely still, and he was staring upwards. My other friend was staring in the same direction too. I looked at what they were looking at. There were 2 bodies hanging from a tree branch. They were hung by their necks, and their body was stock still. I had never seen anything that frightening. It was positively traumatizing. It looked to be a man and a woman. I was so shocked that I couldn't speak. I instinctively began to back away as panic began to settle in. I couldn't look away though. Once I had taken a couple of steps back, I realized that they weren't just the bodies of humans. They were the bodies of mannequins. It must have been a prank. What a cruel prank to pull, I thought. We were all so annoyed at the prank. We were complaining about it as we walked back down the mountain path. I explained what happened to my dad when I got home, and he said he would go up there. I wanted to go with him and help him. We took a stepladder, some pruning scissors, and a hatchet. My friend said that they would come too. When we got there, he set up the stepladder, and we helped keep it steady as he climbed it. He then cut the rope from around the male mannequin's neck, and it fell to the ground. We were going to take it back to the barn and get rid of it. If we left it out there, then maybe it could be used again in another prank, and my dad didn't want us boys to be spooked out by it. It had clearly affected my friends and I. My dad said that he wanted to smash the thing up and throw it away in bin bags. He took the clothes off the thing to separate them, and that was when we noticed that there was something written on the mannequin's chest and stomach. "Whoever takes this mannequin down will die," was written in bright red letters. We all stood there, as still as those mannequins were hanging from the tree. It was really creepy. My dad clearly wanted to get rid of these mannequins as fast as he could, so he got straight back onto the stepladder without saying a word. He cut the female mannequin's noose, and it dropped to the ground with a dull thud. It was wearing a flowery one-piece dress. We could already see the red writing peeking over the top of her dress. "Whoever takes this mannequin down, the person you love the most in life, will die." My dad stood there, silent again. We didn't know what to do, but then my dad spoke, and his words cut through the strange atmosphere those hanging mannequins had created. "Here, boys, go get yourself a drink from the store." And with that, he handed us some money. He didn't usually do things like this. He was a bit tight with his cash. That's how I knew he was worried. He took the mannequins to the barn and smashed them up with an axe and disposed of them. My dad and my friends don't really like to talk about what happened that day. It's become a taboo subject. The most painful memory from that day is the constant reminder of what was written on the female mannequin's stomach. "The person you love the most in life will die." I've been worried about my mum, myself, you know. Who could it be? I'm also worried about my dad. If such a curse exists, I mean, it may have been just a prank, but it was pretty traumatizing. This happened when I was in high school. I was part of the sailing club, and we were at sea. We often went out to do training and things like that. This story takes place close to Guam and Hawaii, kind of in the middle, I guess. After a few days into the voyage, the ship stopped moving. Our captain investigated and tried to find the cause of the trouble. He found nothing wrong with the engine. He then went to the stern and found something entangled around the screw propeller. We all took a look from the stern, and we were all surprised what we saw. A huge squid's tentacles were tangled around the propeller. One of the tentacles was loose, and we could see the length of it as it bobbed in the sea. Our captain said that it could be a 15-foot squid. We couldn't see the body of the squid, just the tentacles. The body was likely under the hull, and the squid was almost certainly dead. Even if we tried to reverse the propeller, we wouldn't be able to break away from the tentacles. There was no other option but to remove them manually. So with ropes, carabiners, knives, and a saw, 2 divers slipped beneath the surface to free our ship from the grip of the squid. After about 2 to 3 minutes, one of the divers emerged and said it would take them about an hour to get the propeller free. He said that the squid was so big they couldn't even get anywhere near the propeller. The diver went back under to get to work. About 30 minutes or so passed, and the divers were back at the surface. This time, they were shouting for someone to help them up as soon as possible. We all grabbed for the ropes and started pulling them. We didn't know what was going on. While we were hoisting them up, something smashed against the hull of our ship, causing it to shake and lilt. It felt like an earthquake. The divers were finally back on deck and everyone was panicking. Then a second crash came to the hull. It really made the ship rock. We were all silent, scared silent. We couldn't do anything but look out across the deep, dark ocean. The body of the squid was now at surface level, and then we saw it. A huge shadow approaching it. The biggest shark I've seen in my life was only meters away from me. It was about 10 foot below the surface, and it dwarfed that 15-foot squid, despite not being directly next to it. It looked to be over 65 foot, and if you consider that it was 10 foot below the surface, it would make it larger than that. Seriously, this thing was the length of a bowling alley, and then some. I could only see its silhouette, but to me it looked like a great white. It didn't stick around long. It shot down to deeper waters and out of our field of vision. I would have thought that it might have been a sperm whale or a whale shark if everyone on the ship wasn't so adamant that it was a great white. Plus, I don't think a whale shark would go for a squid, which is what I presumed the great white was after. Eventually, we discovered that the propeller was bent, and we couldn't get it to work. I think when we heard those crashes against the hull, the shark was tearing away the squid. With the sheer power of that thing, it bent the propeller while it was tearing the squid apart. We had no choice but to send out a rescue signal, and thankfully, an Australian merchant ship bound for Japan picked up our signal and towed us. We were home in a few days. It was scary out there in the open ocean with the thought of that huge shark thing down there. When we finally checked out the damage to our ship, we found that the propeller was hanging on by a thread, and there was no sign of the tentacles that were once so tightly wrapped around it. I wanted to get a copy of the captain's log to share, but I haven't been able to. I'm curious to see how it was formally reported, but I don't think I'll get the chance to read it. Thanks for listening, and I'd love to hear what people think that was. I grew up in the countryside. My parents still live out there. I don't mean nearby the woods or anything. I mean besides a few houses, there's nothing but the mountains and rice fields. Nothing really changes in my hometown. To this day, everything looks how it did when I was young. At night, you wouldn't be able to see your own hand in front of your face. I mean that it's not as well lit as a suburban city. I love it though. I have so many great memories of my rural town and my family home. After I graduated from high school, I got a place at a university in a big city. I would often travel back and forth from the city to my hometown. Of course, I was worried about living in the city after coming from the countryside, but with the support of my family and the new friends I had made, I felt I was doing well. Before I knew it, it was summer vacation, so I decided to go back home. I was in really high spirits because I loved my first steps into adulthood. It was 11 at night when I arrived at the closest station. I knew it would take about 40 minutes to get to my parents' home on foot. I thought about calling them and asking them for a ride. I wish I did now, but that's hindsight for you. No, I wanted to walk home. I guess I didn't want to be seen as a kid anymore. I knew the road was straight without many hills, and it was a dry night, so I thought, why not get some exercise? On the road home, the street lights were few and far between, and there weren't many cars on the street. The road wasn't wide, and it was very dark. I had to pass through many spooky places like the cemetery and through dark tunnels. My high spirits had dwindled away. I was getting really freaked out. I didn't want to call my parents for a ride though. How embarrassing would that be? No, I would have to push on and keep moving. The following takes place when I was about 10 minutes away from my home. I could hear the crickets in the rice field, either side, chirping away. There were no street lights, and the night was eerily still. Then something broke the silence. A terrible groaning sound. I hoped it was just my imagination, and I tried to up my walking pace. Then I heard it again. I knew it was coming from the rice field. I knew that deer and wild boar lived in the area. I hoped it was some kind of beast, but it sounded undeniably human. I took another step forward, and then the voice groaned louder. At this point in the movies, they stop in their tracks or scream. But in my case, I just bolted. It was really frightening. It seemed to get louder as I ran. I kept my head down until I got to my parents' house. I got away safely, and I was greeted by my parents, who had laid on a late dinner for me. The relief of being back home and seeing them again really laid my fears to rest. I didn't want to ruin the vibe, so I didn't tell them about the creepy incident on the way home. I thought I'd just tell them tomorrow. The next day I was awoken by sirens early in the morning. And at about lunchtime, I checked our local news site and found the following. The search for the missing senior citizen was brought to a close this morning. I didn't know what that was about, so I asked my parents what had happened and if we knew the missing woman. Turns out we did know her. I knew her. She was a lovely lady. Unfortunately, she had developed dementia. I was very surprised to hear that she was missing. The most surprising piece of news was the fact that her body was discovered in a rice field about 10 minutes away from my parents' house. This means that the moaning I had heard that night was probably her final pleas for help. I haven't told anyone about this, not even my parents. To be honest, the guilt eats at me. I'm tortured by recurring dreams about that night. My friend lives in Kanagawa, in the valleys. I don't live all that far away, so we hung out often. There isn't much around in the area. There are a couple of shops and a few houses, but the main reason people go out there is for the camping grounds. You have to drive up through the forest to get to my friend's house. It's pretty close to these camping grounds. The roads were lit with really old streetlights. It was busy in the summer and at the weekends, but when it was a weekday or not camping season, it would be quite a quiet and lonely place. The nights are very dark out there, and the road through that forest is very narrow. There's no guardrail either. That road is responsible for several accidents a year, some being fatal. His home was really old, so old in fact that it had an outhouse instead of a bathroom in the main building of the house. The toilet was literally in the garden. His home is just behind a very simple bus stop, and just next to it is a phone booth. You can see this from his outhouse/bathroom window. It's about a meter away, a stone's throw. It's pretty funny actually. If you're standing there using the bathroom, then you can see whoever's using the phone booth or waiting for the bus quite clearly. If you open the window, of course. Because it's so quiet out there, my friend kept the window open all the time. Anyway, it was mid-October when this happened. The foliage aligning the surrounding mountains and woods was changing. The trees' autumn leaves were being blown away to reveal naked jutting branches. My friend and I were up late, and I felt nature's call, so I headed out to use the bathroom. I looked out of the window, and to my surprise I saw an adult woman in the phone booth, which was usually empty. She was facing away from me and she was wearing a coat, so I couldn't see her face. She had gorgeous looking hair though. It was dark and shoulder length. She wasn't using the phone. She was just stood inside of the phone booth, standing still. I called my friend to take a look, and he thought she seemed pretty weird. It was already past midnight and no bus was going to come, so there was no reason to wait there. It's not usual to see someone waiting here to get picked up either. People don't really pass through here. We eventually came to the conclusion that she was waiting here for her boyfriend or someone. We didn't really care, she seemed fine, so we headed back in the house. The next night we were up late again, messing around gaming, and I headed to the bathroom again. I looked out of the window, and I saw the same woman there, stood stock still in the phone booth. I watched her more closely this time. She wasn't moving. She looked to be slumped against the side of the phone booth. That's kind of weird, I thought to myself. She was facing away from me, like last time, but I could see her face reflected in the glass panel. She looked dejected and sad, perhaps even lonely. She was looking down at the floor, not out at the road. I wondered if she had been stood up by her boyfriend, or she had broken up with him recently. I thought that maybe this happened before, and she had come to this particular spot to think about the past. I guessed that phone booth had some sort of significant meaning to her, and she came back periodically to contemplate things. It was still weird to see someone out there at night at the phone booth not using it 2 nights in a row. Even out here in the mountains where attacks and muggers aren't common, it's still not a great deal to hang out alone at night. I then thought to myself, what if she came here to end things? Maybe she was tired of roaming around her neighborhood, festering on the same old painful memories. I started to worry about her. I told my friend about this and he said he would call the police. I said that before he did that, perhaps we should go and check on her ourselves. So we got our shoes on and headed towards the phone booth. However, when you leave my friend's house, you have to turn a corner to face the bus stop. And as we turned that corner to approach the phone booth, we were both shocked to see that it was empty and the woman was gone. We looked around the area. Despite it being dark, we could see quite well. No one was around. I guessed that she had heard the sound of someone approaching, or maybe even the door opening, and decided to hide or hurry home. Either way, I said to my friend, if she was there tomorrow, we should head out of the house quietly to approach her. He agreed. I was so determined to speak to her that I decided to come back later that night to investigate with him. So on the following night, I checked through the window about the same time I saw her last night, and I saw her there again, in the phone booth. I told my friend, and we left the house as silently as possible through his front door, but when we rounded the corner to face the phone booth, she was gone again. My friend said that we should take the hint. She clearly wants to be left alone. He said that we should probably just call the police to perform a welfare check on her. He reminded me that it wasn't really against the law to stand in a phone booth at night. Creepy, yes. Crime, no. Maybe I was making too much of it. I thought something was off, though. I couldn't get her out of my head. But she was now gone. I headed back to his house with him, but stopped to use the bathroom as I actually had to use it. I went to pull my sweatpants down, and then froze in horror. I looked out of the window, and there was no one in the phone booth, but that didn't mean I wasn't alone. I looked beneath the door, and the gap between the floor and the door revealed a pair of feet, female feet, wearing high heels. The toes were pointing towards me. The woman from the phone booth was now just the other side of the outhouse door. I gasped. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. My friend was indoors and I was out here alone. I tried to peek out of the window, but I couldn't see her from that angle. I was there, half crouching with my back against the wall of the outhouse. "Hey. Hey," the woman called. I was silent. I was scared. "Hey. Hey." She kept repeating it. She didn't say anything else. I finally had the courage to respond after a few moments. What's wrong? Are you okay? Do you want me to call the police?" She didn't answer. She just said, "Hey." I was worried. I decided that I was going to call the police. I didn't have a phone though. I needed to get back in the house. Then I heard her say, Hey. Why? That was too much for me. I climbed out of the bathroom window and ran without looking back. I ran straight into my friend's house and I grabbed the phone. I waited with him until the police arrived. When an officer knocked at the door, we opened it and explained the situation. He asked for a description, and then he searched the area and came back. He said that there was no one in the area. He promised to come back and patrol the streets though. My friend said that he saw a police car on occasion over the following days and weeks, but he never saw the woman again. The strangest thing about that night was something I still find difficult to comprehend. When I heard her say, "Why?" twice, I swear the second time I heard her say, "Why?" I heard it from inside the outhouse rather than outside, and that was why I had to get out of there. Something else that's kind of odd is the fact that my friend and I just kind of fell out of touch with one another. It's been a long while since we have talked. It's like something changed. That night, I heard that woman's voice. I'd probably say that we aren't friends anymore. The final odd thing I feel worth mentioning is I bought a motorcycle. Yeah, I like going on long bike rides these days. So I go through that valley area now and then. It's got pretty sweet roads, and I've always been curious if I would ever see her again. Sometimes I go past my friend's place too. The lights are always off. I wonder if he's moved and he just hasn't told me. One night I rode around the area, along the road with the bus stop on it. I don't know how long I was riding for, but I came to a tunnel up ahead. I whizzed out of the tunnel on the other side and I passed a phone booth. There was a woman in that phone booth that looked exactly like the woman I had seen at my friend's place. It had to be a coincidence. I was sure of it. Still, it was too much for me to stop and check. She was even wearing the same clothes. Did the woman move on? Is my friend somehow connected to her? Was it an apparition? Will I ever see her again? I have no idea. No news so far. I guess it can't be bad. I live in Japan, and my family home is next to a shrine, and just beyond the edge of the shrine's grounds is a thick and dense forest. My bedroom window faces towards those woods. It's a really peaceful place to live. The visitors to the shrine enter the grounds from the opposite direction to the woods, so nights and mornings were usually very quiet, and I liked that. However, one night, this all changed. I was listening to some music through my headphones while reading a book. After a while, I realized that I could hear something. I couldn't figure out what it was and where it was coming from, but I knew that it wasn't coming from my headphones, so it got my attention. I shut off my music and I tried to figure out where the sound was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from outside. I moved over to the window and removed all doubt. It was a really weird sound, and that's why it piqued my interest. It was this dull thumping sound. I heard 4 of these thumps. It was kind of like the sound of someone knocking on a wooden door, I guess. I was certain that I had heard this noise before, or something similar to it. I couldn't remember. I didn't let it bother me, and I went back to my book. The next morning, I was on my way to my car, and I was called out to by the neighbor's son. Like I said, I lived next to a shrine, and the head priest of that shrine was my neighbor. His son was sweeping the entrance steps to the shrine. "Good morning," he called out to me. He usually did most mornings. I said good morning back to him and started towards my car. Then he asked, "You, were up late last night, right?" "Oh, yeah, I guess I was," I replied. It was kind of weird of him to ask this. Maybe he saw that the lights were on in my room or something. But it's not like we were friends or anything, so I found it kind of weird that he would comment on that. "So I guess you heard the noise last night then, right?" "What noise?" I said without thinking. I didn't want to be late for work. I couldn't afford to stand here chit-chatting with him all day. Then I remembered that thumping sound. Oh, that's fine, but if you hear that sound again, you don't need to go looking for it, okay? What do you mean, don't go looking? I asked. Just don't look outside. He gave me a little smile, and I gave him a puzzled stare. Then I got in my car. Someone was hammering a nail into the tree. You know, ushi no toki mairi? Yeah, I knew it all right. It's a kind of ritual. Let me just explain it quickly. You make a straw doll, and you write the name of someone you hate on the doll. And if at all possible, you get their hair and put it inside the straw doll. And then you nail that doll through the heart into a tree in the woods, preferably near a shrine. Performing this ritual is said to lay a curse on your intended target. This ritual dates back to the 1700s. By the way, back then the curse layer would dress in white and wear an iron crown anointed by lit candles. The curse can only work if you perform the ritual between 1 and 3 a.m. in order to cause death to the intended target. Practitioners must perform this ritual for 7 nights in a row. However, if someone sees you performing this ritual, then it nullifies the curse's effects. So with this knowledge on board, I felt a little freaked out that someone wanted to do this, but I guess that some people want to uphold these strange, old customs. You know, if someone sees the person do it, the curse won't work, so can you do me a favor and just not look outside? If I look, it's bad then, okay, but why is someone so desperate to do this? And why are you allowing this? I asked. He smiled bitterly and said, Well, it's not our place to ban or stop someone doing it. I just collect the straw doll every morning and dispose of it. Yeah, I nearly saw the person out there last night, and the guy seems really angry, and I think that he could lash out. He's a big guy, you know, and he has a hammer or a mallet. I thought it'd be best not to annoy him. I didn't like this weak excuse. They should just move him on or call the police if he was trespassing. I didn't have time to argue with him though, so I got in my car and I just pulled away. Later that night, I was up late as usual. I'm a bit of a night owl. I heard that same banging sound coming from outside towards the woods. I kind of got used to it. I couldn't be bothered to get up and check. I was just listening and half dozing. I turned over in bed thinking about someone laying a curse on someone. And the sound got louder and louder. It was really annoying, but after a while, it stopped. I made a mental note of going to the police in the morning because I didn't like that this was happening so close to my place. When I opened my shades in the morning, I was shocked to see that there were police everywhere. And a part of the forest was covered in a blue tarp. I could see the other neighbors all gathered around chatting, and I couldn't make out what they were saying. Later that evening, after work, I was shopping, and I picked up the local paper. There was an evening edition. The headline read, "Local priest beaten to death by son." I was so shocked. I spoke with a guy I knew in town who worked in the fishmongers about what I had just read, and he had some inside information. He said that the weapon the son used on his father was a hammer, and he used it on his dad's head. They found the priest's skull shattered into tiny pieces. That meant that all those nights I was hearing that dull, thudding sound. I was hearing hammer on skull. Perhaps the son was trying to dismember the whole body from the head down. No motive was given, and the son remains under arrest. I still live in the same place, and some nights I'm awoken to my imagination taunting me with that thudding sound. I have taken to wearing earplugs at night. It's something that is always going to stay with me. There was this abandoned factory in my hometown. It used to be a milk factory. One of my friends went in there once and told me that there was a ton of adult magazines in there, and it was really popular in my friend circle. It was like the abandoned factory was ours, you know? This all happened when I was at high school, by the way. After school one afternoon, I went with 2 friends to see the abandoned factory. Well, to be honest, I guess that we were less interested in the factory and more interested in getting our hands on those magazines. When we arrived, we found a treasure trove of materials to choose from, enough to put calluses on our hands. There were videos as well as magazines. It was awesome. They were all lying on the ground outside the factory. We decided that we would look over the place. The window frames were rotten and the glass was smashed. We found a way into the factory. It wasn't much of a gap, and it would only fit one of us at a time, but we had our way in. We wanted to look around some more to see if there were other magazines. The ones we found were fine, but some which didn't have pages stuck together would have been a lot better. We got in there and we were strolling around the ground floor. It was a really big place. One of my friends realized that he needed to go home to do some errand he forgot about for his mother, and my other friend wanted to leave with him. I didn't want to leave without checking upstairs. I was sure I was going to find more treasures up there, so I went to find the stairs by myself. There was broken glass and dust all over the stairs, and I could tell that no one had climbed these stairs for a while. Upstairs there were a ton of doors, and most of them didn't open. I felt kind of bummed out. Someone must have locked them all. Then as I walked a little further down the hall, I found a room which was open. I pushed the door open to reveal countless dead pigeons all over the floor. It was seriously weird. In that room I noticed that there was a hole in one of the walls, like a few bricks had been taken out or removed or something. I went over to take a look. I really don't know why I didn't turn back. I guess I was too far gone with the treasure hunt that I couldn't be stopped. My heart was beating in my chest. I felt so excited that I might be about to discover something all the kids at school would be envious of. I looked in that hole, and there was nothing but bones in there. Long bones, like the ones on the skeleton in science class. They looked big enough to belong to a human. That was enough to frighten me and persuade me to end the treasure hunt. I ran for it. Something deep down told me to get the hell out of there as soon as possible. I shattered all the glass on the stairs as I ran, and when I got home I was too scared to tell my parents what had happened, for fear of being in trouble, and looking at those magazines that were too old for me. When night fell, and I was lying in bed, my brain tormented me with possibilities, and I saw those bones every time I tried to sleep. It was really stressful. The next day at school I told my friends about what had happened, and they really didn't believe me. So I went back to the factory again to show them what I had seen. Being accused of lying is way scarier than some old bones in a factory to me. We climbed in the same way, through the gap through the window, and we reached and climbed the stairs. We got to the room at the end of the hall, and I opened the door. All the pigeons were gone. I was shocked and immediately went to the back of the room where the hole was, and discovered that the bones were gone too. I remember getting upset because my friends didn't believe me, but in the end I think I managed to convince them. This was the first strange and creepy thing that had happened to me. It was really unexplainable. Where were the bones and the pigeon corpses? After this event, the abandoned factory stood there for half a year longer before it was torn down. It still feels very mysterious to me, but now that I'm older, and I have had time to think about it, I think that someone was living there. Maybe the glass on the stairs was their way of knowing if anyone was coming or going. For all I know, whoever brought the bones there could have been in one of the locked rooms that I tried, and that thought sends a shiver up my spine. I'm so glad my gut feeling told me to get out of there, and I'm glad I listened to it. When I was young, it took about half an hour by bike to get to school. There was a bus, but the bus cost money. I didn't want to ask my parents for bus money all the time. Money was kind of a taboo subject back then in our family, so I was happy to go to school by bicycle. The route to school was simple enough. There was a river flowing halfway through the route, from east to west. There were 2 routes you could choose. The first route goes alongside the river on the north side, but there is a national highway, so there's a lot of traffic, even at night. It's a little dangerous. The other route was the opposite side of the highway. This way was a lot more peaceful. There were only a few houses out there. You also had nicer scenic views. You could see the mountains, countryside fields, and of course the dense forest. If you take this route at night, it's really unlikely that you'll pass by a car, a bike, or person walking the streets. There were rumors about this route though. Some people said that ghosts appeared on that route. There were literally no streetlights. Because of this, most of the students at my school avoided that route on the way home. Not me though. I had ridden through the forest on that side with my dad since I was a kid. I knew the way so well that even when I came home late, I would turn the lights off on my bike and rely solely on the moonlight to guide me. It was relaxing. I would listen to the sound of the river. There was a really cool part of the woods where the branches of the trees had created this kind of natural arch. It looked like it was right out of a storybook. I loved it. On the night that this experience takes place, I was heading home late from school. I took part in some club activities, so it wasn't uncommon for me to be late home. It was already past 9 p.m, and I had stayed late to speak to friends. Someone said that a typhoon was coming, and we were all hoping that school would be closed tomorrow. So we didn't mind staying a little late if we weren't going to hang out tomorrow. The warm breeze was strong, so I decided to head home before the weather turned. So I chose my usual route home, through the forest, just in case it rained. The clouds were low and looking grey. My bike had a kinetic energy-powered light bulb, so if I hit a switch, it would make pedaling a little harder, but it would provide light. I hit the switch, but the light didn't come on. I guessed that the bulb had bust. This was just what I needed. I tried to kick on and hurry home before it rained. It was so dark out, but my eyes had grown accustomed to the darkness. I was able to keep going with confidence along the roads, but I had to slow as I entered the forest. As I entered the forest, I felt that something was different. I felt a little frightened of the woods that night. I told myself that I didn't need to be scared. The forest is creepy at night, but it's the hole in the ear that lets in the fear, that and the absence of light. I pushed those thoughts to the back of my mind and entered the woods. Headwinds grew strong. As I passed through the woods, it made pedaling harder and harder. I grinned and bared it. I just wanted to go home. All of a sudden there was a weird smell which accompanied the wind. It smelled so bad. Then I thought I could see something popping up and down, out of the dark just ahead. I stared forward, puzzled, and then that was when I felt something grab my left shoulder. I have never been scared of the forest, but that night changed everything. I pedaled as fast as I could, making a voiceless scream against the wind. My heart was racing. I was terrified. I put some distance between myself and where I felt the hand on my shoulder, and I thought to myself, whoa, finally I had a paranormal experience. I hope that's the end of it. I kept riding. I was powered by adrenaline. I swear I heard something behind me. I didn't have the courage to look behind me though. There was even less visibility than before. I hated it. Thankfully the path had widened, and it was largely flat. For some reason I shouted the name of my dog, and then I pedaled noticeably faster. I got through the forest, and I began to see the welcome sight of neighbouring houses through the branches in the trees. I still didn't have the courage to look back and check if anything was following me. When I came out of the woods, there was a convenience store just the other side of the bridge. I chose that to be the point where I would look behind me. There was nothing chasing me. I felt my heart rate slow. I locked up my bike outside of the convenience store and I headed in. I have never been so happy to hear the sound of the entry bell in my life. I got even happier when I saw that a couple of my friends were stood by the magazine rack. They laughed and said that I looked like I had just seen a ghost. I chuckled with them, but I was too embarrassed to tell them what had happened. One of them looked at my shoulder with a grimace and then asked, "Mate, what happened to your shoulder? It's filthy." The fear came rushing back to me. I looked at my shoulder and there was some disgusting stain there. Immediately I unbuttoned my shirt and I hurled it into the trash. My friends all laughed and asked what the hell I was doing. I just got on my bike and left. When I got home, my mum asked me about what happened and why I wasn't wearing a goddamn shirt. I just said that I forgot it at school. Relax, I had an undershirt on. Dinner was ready for me, and I was hungry. I chowed down, and with chowing down comes clarity and rationality, because I arrived at the conclusion that perhaps something from above in the trees had fallen, blown by the wind, to land on my shoulder. Perhaps it wasn't a paranormal experience. With that in mind, I felt kind of embarrassed about how I acted back at the convenience store. I was a little scared, so I got my big sister and the dog to stay in my room that night. Unfortunately, school wasn't closed the next day. The typhoon didn't hit our area, so I had to go to school. However, thanks to my canine best friend, I was able to sleep, and sleep well. When I woke up, I had started to think that I had created a scene out of nothing. The embarrassment hadn't faded. I had breakfast with my family, grabbed an umbrella, and headed to school. I chose the other route to school that morning. I took a look at the forest when I got to the bridge, and it didn't look that daunting, but still I didn't want to go in there. On that day during lunch, I heard a story. I heard something that would justify my fears out there in the dark woods. I wasn't the only one who had an encounter out in the forest. There was a boy at school who was delivering newspapers. He was a couple of years older than me and my friend group, but my sister knew him. Anyway, his job was to deliver newspapers in our area, and a small village just beyond the edge of the forest. So like me, he used the forest to get to and from his newspaper route. He would make these deliveries early, like really early. He was out on his bike delivering at 5:30 a.m., up at the crack of dawn. He headed through the woods as usual and stopped still in his tracks when he saw a body swinging in the morning breeze. The body's neck hung crooked from a tree limb. This is where mine and his stories crossed paths, because I don't think I was grabbed on the shoulder that night. No. I think it was the clatter of some dangling foot that brushed my shoulder. I do not know if the individual who chose to take their life could have been saved at that point, but there is one thing I do know. Had the light on my bicycle worked, I might have been able to do something to save them, if it wasn't too late. I think about that night more than I'd like to admit. Yeah. If the light was working, maybe things would have been different. I never go through the forest these days. This happened when I was in the second grade of elementary school. One night my parents had to leave to attend a wake, and they left me home alone to house sit. They told me that I was in charge of the house. I was to eat dinner, take a shower, and go to bed. They said that they would be back after midnight. I had never been alone in the house before. It was strange, but I wanted to enjoy this newfound freedom. So I was watching TV, feeling really powerful, as I could choose whatever channel I wanted. We live in the rural countryside of Kyushu. Our neighbors are a couple of minutes away, so nights are usually very calm and quiet. I think it was about 8 or 9 o'clock. I had finished watching a TV show, and then the news came on. Boring, I thought. I guess it was time to take a shower and hit the hay. I was contemplating this massive decision while reading a manga comic, lying down on my bed. Then I heard a knock at the door. Oh, my parents are back home early, I thought as I went to the door. I looked through the frosted glass, and I saw a big shadow of a person out there. Now, my mum is only 150 centimeters tall, so it couldn't be her. Maybe it's my dad, I assumed. I called out, "Hello?" A deep, male voice replied, "Hi, little girl. Is your dad home?" My dad was a bit of a drinker, and he often hung out with these booze hounds, so I thought this might be one of his pals or something. So I carelessly responded, "No, he's not here. He's at a funeral." There was a short pause. "And what about your mother?" I didn't know what to say. I knew my mum hung out with her friends and they went drinking too, so maybe this guy knew both of them or something. But something deep inside told me not to reply. I felt a bit suspicious. What do I do? I thought that no matter what I would answer with, I might end up making another mistake or getting into trouble somehow. "Mum's not home either?" The voice persisted. This was so strange. We never usually had people coming to the house at this time of night. This wasn't right. There was something about his voice too. It didn't sound like the local accent. This wasn't good. I felt extremely anxious, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything in response. "Are you alone in there, little girl?" I began to cry silent tears while standing stock still and silent. you open the door for me? I have something I have to give your dad. I'm just here to drop it off. He said in a voice so extremely sickly, the kind of voice you hear when someone is trying to coax someone else into doing something. I mustered up enough strength to reply. Can you come back tomorrow? He didn't reply. He just started to violently turn the doorknob. I understood the man's intentions now, and it felt like an arrow of ice went through my heart. My throat closed up, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. Then came the sound of his fist punching the frosted glass. Open it! He roared again and again. Please stop, I pleaded. It's so loud, I said. Then my brain kicked into gear, and I ran into the living room and grabbed the house phone. But I didn't even know the number of the place where my parents were at. My parents had told me about people who call the police when they don't really need their help. Hoax calls. I was nervous, thinking I might get in trouble for doing a hoax call. While I was panicking about what to do, I heard the glass shatter in the hallway. He had breached the front door. A horrible thick arm shot through the hole in the glass. I remember he was wearing a jet black jumper. I screamed for help. I remember thinking this was more like a scene from a movie, not from real life. The arm was groping for the lock. While the arm was desperately probing for the lock, I heard another sound coming from outside. It was somebody shouting my name. Someone shouting that they had called the police. I wandered over to the door, and I saw the owner of this new voice. I jumped for joy. It was the voice of the older lady who lived next door. She had heard all the commotion and came to see what was going on. As she shouted that she had called the police, the man ran for it. I let her in. I was inconsolable. I just bawled my eyes out the whole night through. The police arrived about 30 minutes before my parents came back. When my parents did come back, they apologized again and again for leaving me by myself. In the end, we didn't know who the intruder was. My dad just assumed it was a robbery attempt. Just as a side note though, our town is located along the East China Sea in Kyushu, and there are a lot of suspicious ships around the ports. In addition, my town is famed for many unsolved missing persons cases. The police never found the man, but I often replay that moment in my head over and over. And thanks to that man, I have had countless sleepless nights. I don't like to think about what might have happened to me if my neighbor hadn't been there. We became very close with our neighbors after this, and my parents never let me house sit again. This happened 10 years ago to the day. My family consists of 4 members. I'm the wife and mother to my husband and 2 daughters. When this story takes place, my daughters were both in elementary school. After working for a company for about 3 years, my husband applied to transfer to another area in the country, the Kansai region. We decided to rent a detached house. We found a hell of a deal. The residential area was a little old though. The nearest train station was about a 20-minute walk away, and I often cycled, so in less than 10 minutes you could get to the station or the supermarket. It wasn't bad. Our new house was great. It had a huge garden, 4 bedrooms, a living room, a bathroom, a dining room, and a kitchen. The house was built 50 years ago. It's a little older than we hoped for, but we were really pleased, and I remember agreeing with my husband to live there for 3 or 4 years at least. I think that's what the lease was for, 3 years or so we had no hesitation in signing on the dotted line. The rent was being paid by his company. There would be no way we could afford that house without his company's help, so it felt like life was very luxurious. We had been living in our new home for about 3 months when I got sick. I had never had a serious illness before, and I rarely catch colds, but I developed cholangitis. It's an inflammation of the bile duct. That illness put me in the hospital for 3 weeks. I was told that my illness must have been caused by fatigue. Likely I strained too hard while moving in. I didn't think that was right, but I wasn't going to argue with the doctors in the state I was in. Strangely, the inflammation spread to my liver while in hospital. It was horrible. I went yellow with jaundice. Fortunately, the treatment took effect and I was discharged from hospital. But since that illness, I felt like my energy levels never really got back to the way they used to be. I found myself tiring easily. Not long after I had recovered, my eldest daughter was taken ill. She had tonsillitis. Her throat had swollen so much due to irritation that she struggled to breathe. We took her to the hospital one night because it kept getting worse and worse. A paramedic in the emergency room told us that her trachea, the passageway for breathing, had almost closed over. She was on the verge of suffocation. So we had 2 sudden illnesses, all relatively early into our new life in Kansai and our new home. I started to have strange and suspicious thoughts about our home. Something began to feel not quite right there. I asked my husband how he felt, and he said that there was nothing wrong with the house. He laughed at my paranoia. He wouldn't have known if anything was wrong anyways. He was always busy at work. I didn't ask him again after he laughed at me. A few months passed, and my daughter was riding her bike to her after-school studies. We put her in a cram school. She was hit by a minivan. The minivan had made a sudden turn in the road. It wasn't my daughter's fault. She broke her arm and some of her ribs. Fortunately, it wasn't life-threatening, but she needed surgery on her arm, as it had a compound fracture. 2 accidents are plausible, but this third one really spooked me. Everyone in our family, besides my husband, had either been stricken with illness or had been in an accident. I couldn't help but believe that this wasn't a coincidence. Just as I was arriving at this conclusion, I heard something disturbing from my neighbor. I don't know how it came up in conversation, but it did. Many years ago, in place of our neighborhood, was a large cemetery graveyard. During the renovations, town replanning, and land adjustment post the effects of the Second World War, it was decided that the graves would be dug up and moved to another area. However, the neighbors say that even in recent times, human bones can still be found in the soil, beneath these houses, and beneath the grass in the garden. It was then that I realized that our family home had been sitting atop of desecrated graves. I felt sweat all over my back. I was genuinely terrified by this realization. I had to go tell my husband. Once I told him, he looked shocked. I guess that he was thinking about himself and how he was the only one who hadn't had anything bad happen to him. It was already on my mind. I asked, pleaded with him to agree to move house. I don't care if I sounded superstitious. I couldn't risk another member of our family getting hurt. We broke our lease with that house over the graveyard and told them that we would be leaving as soon as we found a new place. I didn't care. I didn't ever want to see the shock on my daughter's face as she played in the garden only to trip over a human bone. We had to pay a penalty fee for breaking the lease, and after all those hospital bills, it wasn't exactly welcomed. We found a new place within a week, and I was really happy about that. As I was packing up some boxes, I got a call. It was from my husband's work. They told me he was heading to hospital in an ambulance. I was so scared and nervous for him. I raced to the hospital, and I was relieved to hear that he had kidney stones, and all he had to do was just pass the stone. After he recovered, and we moved home, all the weird injuries and accidents ended. We're still living a quiet and peaceful life here. I really believed that something was conspiring against our family in that house. The atmosphere was so heavy there. All of our moods were much lower than they are today. It's like we didn't even like one another in that house. I can't explain it. Or maybe it could have been a series of coincidences. All I know is that if a series of unfortunate events befalls your family at the same rate it did mine, maybe you should try and find out if there's something more than bad luck at play. Question all aspects of your situation. How well do you know the history of the home you live in? This happened about 4 years ago, when I was in college. Back then, I didn't really care about credits or attendance, really. I was enjoying the college life a little too much. My university was out in the middle of the countryside, which meant that there wasn't all that much to do at night. So I would often go on road trips and night drives with 3 regular friends. It was a warm summer night and we were being idiots like we usually did. My friend was clinging to the roof of the car while I drove. He wanted to see how long he could hold on for. I saw Jackie Chan do it and I thought it would be really cool if we could do it. This should go without saying, but please don't try this. It's really stupid and he could have died. So, he was on the roof, and one of my friends shouted out of the window that we had hit 40 kilometers an hour, which is about 25 miles per hour. "That's enough, stop, I'm gonna fall," he said. "You give up? I'll show you no mercy," I said. I started to slow down a little. I wasn't a monster, I was just kidding. "Stop the car, man, I'm really gonna..." Then I heard a dull thud on the road behind. I felt an instant sense of dread rise from the pit of my stomach. I called out to my friend, and I didn't get a response. I looked in the rearview mirror, and saw my friend was lying there, in the road. I pulled over, and ran over to him. Fortunately, because I had slowed down, he didn't seem that injured. The only thing is that he broke his watch. I asked him what happened, and if he lost his grip. He said that he didn't lose his grip. He was distracted by something, and he just pointed towards the moon. "It's just the moon, you dumbass," I said. "Look closer, you dumbass," he said. When I looked closer, I could see something flying through the air. It was glowing purple. Was this a UFO? It was a flying object I had never seen before, so that's what it felt like. I stood there dumbstruck, staring at the purple flying object. It was really bright. We had driven up to this observation area in the mountains, usually popular in the day, but quiet at nighttime. I experienced a different kind of fear that day. Sure, I have been scared by horror films and the thought of a home invader or something, but I'd never been so deeply chilled by the presence of something so incomprehensible, so inconceivable. I think that all 4 of us were experiencing this new sense of terror. We were literally shaking. That flying object, it was shimmering. It seemed to have an ability to teleport. It had now moved closer to the summit of the mountain. Closer to where we were. "We have to check this out, guys," one of my friends said. About that guy. He was 22, a self-proclaimed stud despite being a virgin. How the hell did this guy become the most confident in our little friend group all of a sudden? My fear was overpowered by my curiosity. I mean, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I had to go. And through the power of convincing, my other 2 friends gave us the okay sign. We drove towards this shimmering object, full of a mix of fear and excitement. I remember clearly that one of my friends said the light must be coming from some sort of construction lamp nearby. The instant my friend said that, we heard a terribly loud noise coming from the direction of the light. It was hurting my ears. My friend asked me to pull over. He looked as if he was about to cry. Before I stopped the car, I felt like I hit something and ran it over. We were all visibly in pain, and now curiosity gave way to panic. We were sweating profusely. I could see it teeming off our brows. I had to get out and check the damage to the car. My dad made me keep a flashlight in the glove box. I still do to this day. There was no damage to the car. Off in the distance, we heard that crushing sound. It sounded like the snapping of giant trees. It was monstrous. I just wanted to get in the car and get away. We couldn't stop the ringing in our ears. It was really scary. I shouted to everyone to get back in the car. The shining object in the sky was moving again. It was descending the mountain in a straight line. It was approaching our direction with some speed. I felt like this couldn't possibly be happening. I shouted at them to hurry up and get in the car, and once we were all in, I sped away from the light. I must have broken some speed rules that night. Maybe I was channeling my inner Jackie Chan, who knows. Everyone was silent in the car. We went to a convenience store at the bottom of the mountain. It for some reason felt safe there. The shining purple UFO thing seemed to hover in place where I thought I hit something, and then we watched as the light slowly faded into the dark. I have no idea what the hell happened that night, but it felt like something otherworldly. We told our friends about that night, and unsurprisingly, no one believed us. What was that thing in the sky? A new government-tested aircraft? A UFO? I guess we'll never know. Whatever it was, only the four of us saw it. This is a true story about the apartment that I used to live in. In my company, there are many employee transfers regardless of gender, and there are many assignments for individuals, more than I've experienced in other companies. In this company, I have worked in human resources and accounting, but last year I was asked to go and help head up a new branch office in a new town. It was a secondment, which meant that I would be working there for about 3 months, or until the project was completed. The company had company-owned accommodations, so I didn't need to find my own place or do any viewings. I was grateful that I didn't need to set any of that up myself. About a month before I moved, I went into our headquarters and was able to take a look at the place I was about to live in. It looked pretty big. I guess that was because it was empty. There were no possessions there. When I got there, I went around the room taking photos of any damage. I've been stung for damage I didn't make before. That's another story though. I had a friend and a co-worker help me with the move. I wanted to be the first person through the door, so I went there before they arrived, with a couple of bits. I brought my luggage upstairs, but this time around I felt something was a little off about the place. I just put it down to some new home jitters. My friends arrived, and fortunately I didn't have too much work I could offer them. I didn't have many boxes. It worked out well because, if I remember correctly, one of my friends had to shoot off after a couple of hours. My boss came over just after noon, and we both headed out to get some lunch and to catch up. He was acting a little bit odd that day. He asked me, "Are you sure you feel comfortable in that room?" I know what he was getting at. My boss was really into the paranormal, and he would often speak about how his family had the second sight when he had a few drinks at company parties. I played the game and I asked him if he saw anything in my new apartment. "Nah, I haven't actually, but I will say that there is an atmosphere there, which I find more than unpleasant." I didn't feel like talking about that kind of stuff with him. It was only going to spook me out, so I changed the subject and he dropped it. I headed back to my new place and unpacked a few more things, and then I went out. I wanted to check out my new neighborhood and get acclimated to the area. When that was all over, I just headed to bed. You know how moving days are. They're a bit tiring. It was around the 25th of September when this happened. It was a strangely hot and humid night. Blame global warming. Anyway, I woke up for some reason that night. I had sweated so much in my sleep that I felt the need to take a shower. Literally, I couldn't lie there in my pajamas anymore. I don't know, call me OCD, but I'd never woke up covered in sweat like that. Anyway, in my groggy state, I stumbled over to the shower and back once again when I was clean. I noticed something while heading back to my bed. I looked towards my balcony and I noticed that through the gap in the curtains there was a tall and black shadow. I didn't care that much, I just guessed that it was a shadow cast by a neighbor. I didn't know enough about the place to know where the shadows fell at that stage. The next day was a working day, and since I was new, it was a long day. We didn't finish until after 10 p.m. I was really tired by the time I got home. I could barely remember the shadow I had seen the night before. About 2 weeks passed since I moved, and eventually I got into the rhythm of my new job and I was able to finish work at a sensible time. Most nights I would be home before 7, which I took as a win. Some nights I would hear this really loud banging noise. It sounded like it was coming from the balcony area. I thought it was probably the person above making some noise. Since I was always tired, I didn't have the energy to give much of a shit about it. After about 2 months, I was given a Friday off work. I think that was because of the work I had done. I don't know. I didn't say no to it. I didn't really have any plans for it, though. I figured I would just have a long lie in bed and pretty much do nothing all day. Well, that was the plan, but I was rudely awoken. Someone literally shook me awake. You know that feeling when someone grabs you by your shoulder to get your attention? Yeah, that, but you're asleep and you're living alone. Can you imagine how I felt waking up like that? To be honest, I kind of thought that it was an earthquake. Then I realized that nothing in the room was shaking or had fallen. I naturally looked towards the balcony. My bed faced the doors to the balcony. I always drew the curtains before going to sleep, but I noticed that one of them was half open. I started to get a little worried, and I thought that there might be a break-in in progress. Was there a thief out there on the balcony? I got up instantly and looked around my apartment to see if anything had been taken or if anything was broken. I hurriedly looked around and found nothing out of place. To be honest, I was still half asleep. I was annoyed that I got woken up, so I wanted to get back to bed as soon as possible. I stumbled back towards my bed and got the fright of my life because there, just beyond the frosted glass of the balcony doors, was a dark, hulking shadow. It was so daunting to see that. I just froze in place. I was certain that that shadow couldn't be cast by a neighbor or someone's laundry blowing in the wind. I realized that it really could be a thief hiding on the balcony. I didn't know what to do. I had to do something, but I felt like I was just glued to the spot. I convinced myself that I had to act. I needed to shut the window if there was someone out there. I knew that if I did that, then the window would make this noise as I locked it. They were so squeaky. I decided to bite the bullet, and with a sudden burst of courage, I threw open the curtains to confront whoever was on my balcony, but there was no one out there. Where the hell did that shadow on my balcony go? I had to be sure, so I opened the doors and stepped out to make sure that no one was out there. I even looked over to the next balcony. Nothing. The one above. Nothing. And below. Nothing. I mean, I was on the 3rd floor of an apartment block. It's not like someone could be stood outside. Even if they were outside, I bet I would have seen them leave. You know, there were no places they could exactly disappear into. It was a really weird incident. I guess I blamed it on my lack of sleep at the time. I was determined to enjoy my day off, so I went out shopping. I bumped into a female colleague that I quite liked. Since I didn't have any plans, I asked her if she wanted to get a coffee. She said yes. It didn't seem like such a bad day off in the end. She was sat opposite me, and she broke a comfortable period of silence by asking, "Are you okay, living in that apartment?" "Why, what's up with it?" "Oh, I guess you are then. I guess you haven't heard anything." I pressed her for more information, and it turned out that someone took their life in the apartment above the one I was renting, no longer than about a year ago. I was shocked to hear that, and more shocked with the further details I heard. The man who took his life was the very man I was here to replace on my secondment. I knew that he had been let go from the company, but I didn't know the backstory. He was under a lot of pressure at work. The boss apparently gave him a horribly tough time. His home life didn't seem much better either, as he cheated on his wife with a co-worker. Once the news got out at the company, everyone at work shunned the guy and made their feelings known. Supposedly feeling like he didn't have a friend in the world, he made the ultimate sacrifice by tying a rope around his neck and plummeting from the 4th floor. His body was found dangling in front of the balcony that I now owned. I really didn't expect to hear that. I had no answer to it. This new life in this new town started to feel strange and frightening. Things were going well with my date though. She was eager to see my place. I thought, why not? I didn't exactly want to go home alone. When I came home, I saw that shadow on the balcony. Enough was enough. I wasn't buying the ghost stories. It looked like someone was out there, and I suspected it could be a sneaky neighbor. I stormed towards the balcony. I saw something that I will never forget. The darkest shadow of a face, swinging to match my rush to the balcony. I only saw it briefly, but that face appeared to belong to a middle-aged man, and it was frozen in a twisted scream. My co-worker friend dropped to her knees. I looked back towards her, then straight back at the balcony window, and I saw that shadowy, horrible face beyond the window smile briefly, then disappear. She woke up later, and she seemed to be in a bit of a state. She didn't want to leave me alone, but I tried to insist that I'd be okay. She offered me to stay with her that night, and I was pretty happy with that idea. I didn't overstay my welcome. We were both freaked out, and we both slept with the lights on. I went back on Saturday morning, and nothing further happened that day or the next. I guess that was probably because I didn't open the curtains or the window. I moved my bed so I would no longer be facing the balcony as I slept. And I did sleep with the lights on. I had a stroke of luck. The project I was set to help out with got completed earlier than expected, so I was able to leave. On the last day, I opened my curtains and looked out to the balcony, and I saw the shadow by the window. I really do wonder if it was the spirit of that man who ended it all. Was he looking for his co-worker? Or for his wife? Or for some kind of revenge? Was he looking for his old life back? I don't know. Either way, he's looking for something. I hope his spirit doesn't linger here. I feel sorry for the next resident. My hobby is sleeping in my car. I like to do it on days before public holidays, and not the weekend. I don't want people to see me. Usually if they do, they report me to the police. The police usually just want to move me on. If it's not the police, then it's the youngsters. They peer into my car windows. This makes choosing a perfect spot all the more difficult for me. It was around summer of last year. It was late at night and I was just driving around trying to find a decent place to sleep. I was on a mountain road and I saw a turning for what looked like a disused building. The rusty old sign told me that this used to be an observatory. I saw a truck in the car park. He must be taking a rest too, I thought as I pulled in. Perfect. There was another truck in the car park too. I parked away from the trucks in the middle of the car park. I pulled out my phone and played with it until I became sleepy. Then I put the seat all the way back and pulled my blanket over me and fell asleep. I woke up during the night because my throat was dry. I went to grab a drink from my bag, and just as I did that, I heard a small stone or something strike the back of my car. I looked in my rear view mirror, and there was nothing there. I guess that it might have been a bug or something. It's not uncommon. I took a drink, and I got back to sleeping. The second time I woke up was because I really needed the restroom. I looked at my phone. 4:27. I got out of the car. I kind of hoped that the abandoned observatory had a toilet, but it didn't. I didn't really want to climb a fence and wander around in the middle of the night to find out if there was one either. So I found a spot out of the way and relieved myself. As I was doing so, I heard one of the truck doors open and shut. Someone else is awake, huh? As I came back to my car, I saw him standing there. He looked to be about my age. He wore glasses. Hey, you couldn't sleep last night, right? Were you scared or something? I looked at him a bit puzzled and asked, What do you mean? Ha! You didn't notice then? I was a bit spooked by his response. Then he began to elaborate. He said that he was watching a DVD when I pulled into the parking area. He thought that it was a bit odd since truckers almost exclusively use this place to park up and take a rest. When the DVD finished, he looked up and noticed a woman stood in front of my car with her hands on the hood. He said that seeing this freaked him out. He took his eyes off the woman for just a second, and when he looked back, she was at my driver's side door. He said that when she noticed him looking her way, she ducked down by the side of my car. He kept checking on me, and after a while, he couldn't see the woman anymore. He then said he went to sleep in the back of his truck after checking all his doors were locked. I thought that he was just trying to freak me out, so I questioned him. He said that if I didn't believe him, that I should go and check my window for handprints, as she had cupped her hands against the glass, possibly to look in on me. He came with me to check the window to see if there were any handprints there. There wasn't any. I thought at this point he might have been doing a kind of thing that truckers did to make sure us non-truckers didn't use their parking spots or something. I don't know. We then went to check the hood. And there was something there this time. A small pair of indentations at the front of the car. I was pissed. Then I heard the trucker shout, "Hey, there's something worse around the back, buddy." There were some scratches and another little indentation, as if something had struck it. I heard the door of the other truck open and close, and an older man came over. He said that he had seen her before. What? I thought. She's been here before. She did the same to me my first night here. I thought she was after some company, but she never said a word. She just stared. I asked a local about her, in a bar, down that road. Turns out that she does this all the time, but only to newcomers to the parking lot. It's fine though. She won't hurt you. All she does is stare. I looked at the other truck driver in shock. and I hightailed it out of there. I mean, I just could not handle that. Knowing how dark and isolated we were in that location was enough for me. For someone to arrive on foot, way out in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, just to mess with me? Nope. I'll never go there again.